In this video, I would like to talk to you about descriptive writing. This is for GCSE. All of the exam boards have a requirement for students to write creatively, and some of you might end up writing descriptive writing using an image. This is especially the case for AQA, for example. I did this lesson recently as part of a revision session, and I think that students found it particularly useful because I was focusing on these things on the front page here. So zooming in to describe things in a lot of detail, developing your writing, so in other words, saying enough in the first place, using the image to help you organize and structure your response, and also, once you've done that, being able to then think about using a cyclical structure to help organize your writing. So that is what this video is about, and we'll be using these two images here on the right hand side, one of a park and one of a lighthouse on the coast. So effective descriptive writing means you elaborate in enough detail to create imagery for readers. Good descriptive writing is sensory. We use the senses in order to recreate a sense of place. If you do not go into enough detail with your writing, it means that a lack of imagery will be created. And if there's a lack of imagery, the reader cannot see what you're talking about. And whenever we read a novel or a short story, the description is supposed to help us see exactly what the writer has imagined. And we do that in our descriptive writing. So this session really is all about finding ways to elaborate in enough detail. So zooming in, a lovely phrase that I've just thought up actually is good descriptive writing. You say a lot about a little rather than a little about a lot. So this is the idea of zooming in. Sometimes what happens is, in one paragraph, students will talk to you about 10 different things. And the examiner says, slow down, because you haven't actually described anything in detail. You've, in effect, listed to me lots of different things, but you're not describing them to me. So you need to make sure that you are zooming in like a telescope or a camera. And you almost imagine that you're stood next to what you're describing, so you can see all the little details that you want to tell the reader about. The more detail, the more imagery is created. Okay, and that links very nicely to this idea of developing your ideas. You need to make sure that you structure or organize your writing in a coherent way so that your paragraphs flow and that they all link together very seamlessly. Exam boards like writing where the paragraphs all flow nicely. And one of the things that you can do to do this is using prepositions, which I'll be talking about in a second. So you need to make sure that with your descriptive writing that your paragraphs flow together seamlessly and are coherent. And the image that AQA will provide for you will help you structure your response, because you can break the image apart into lots of separate components. So whenever you have an image, and that image could be of anything, the first question you need to ask yourself is, what is the focal point of the image? What is the first thing that your eye is attracted to? And this focal point can therefore be used as the first thing that you talk about in your answer. So chances are this might be a building or a particular object or even a person that your eye is immediately drawn to. And in order to create a cyclical structure, you could then return back to describing this at the end, because it's the focal point, it's the point of the picture which is of most importance to you. Something else to do with the picture before you start writing is to break the image down into lots of different sections, to dissect the image. And once you've split the image up into lots of different parts, each of those sections could be a paragraph, which focuses your attention on just one thing at a time, rather than getting overwhelmed by everything at once. And then in terms of prepositions, I've already done a video about prepositions last year. Prepositions are words that link paragraphs together. We've got some examples there on the left in that box. You can see that all these prepositions are designed to give you a sense of location, where something is in relation to something else. And if you use these words to start your paragraphs or sentences, it means that it actually makes your writing flow together and link seamlessly together. So I would really be encouraging my students to be using these prepositions in order to create that sense of place in their description, but also to make sure they're writing in the paragraphs all flow nicely. Okay, so let's look at this first image. The question that you get, for example, would be something like, write a piece of description about a park as suggested by this picture. And you have this image here of this grassy area with the war memorial, the trees behind it, with what looks like a cafe with umbrellas underneath the trees and a kind of flower bed. So this is what you are using. And what I would be encouraging my students to do is to avoid the temptation of describing everything at once. You actually need to break the image down into lots of different separate focuses. And then each of those separate focuses can become a paragraph. It also prevents you from getting distracted by everything at once. So think of your journey around the image. So in this image, I would want the focal point to be the war memorial. That appears to be the thing that I notice first. So that is what I would start by talking about. My second paragraph would be the gardens in front, these tulips, but I would also perhaps imagine that there are some formal gardens with a fountain and topiary and gravel and rose bushes. You know, you can add things into the image as well. So my first paragraph would be the war memorial. My second paragraph would be the gardens. My third paragraph would be about the cafe under the trees. And you can see I've got this kind of anti-clockwise journey, because at the end, if I'm going to use a cyclical structure, I would return back to the war memorial. And that would get me some marks because it shows I'm consciously crafting my writing to include a cyclical structure. It comes under that organisation category of your writing. So that would be my journey. And that journey is helping me structure my writing because I know what I'm saying and when. As I move between those paragraphs, I'm using some prepositional phrases. So, opposite the memorial, the gardens. Behind the gardens, the cafe. In front of the cafe, the memorial. So you can see in those pink boxes there, in the kind of green boxes, I'm using some prepositions to link my paragraphs together, but also reinforce that I'm moving around the image in this fashion. So I would be encouraging my students to think of their picture like a journey. Imagine you're walking around the image on these paths, on the grass, etc. Where would you go? And as you walk, as you journey around the image, what would you want to describe? Okay. So in the next slide, you're going to see a bit of writing. Because what I've done is I've shown you an example of what zooming in means. Now you can see that we're about, 100 meters from that war memorial? I can see bits of it. I can see the railings, I can see the person on the top, I can see the plaques on it, but I can't see anything else because I'm too far away from it. So I need to use that picture as a prompt and use my own imagination to add things into the image myself. Things that the picture isn't showing me, but things that I can still imagine exist while I'm stood next to it. Okay, so here we have an example of that first paragraph. So I would say, walking through the park, I noticed to my left the stone war memorial standing proudly, watching the sun curve across the sky. The granite stonework was peppered with patches of greenish-yellowish moss, and dandelions had begun to erupt around the base, suggesting nature was reclaiming the concrete. Written in old brass plaques were the names of our war heroes, some of which had become weathered and worn by countless years of driving rain. Some names had chewing gum pressed into them. On top of the stone plinth was a courageous-looking Winston Churchill, who seemed to be completely oblivious to the crow perched on his head and a disgusting white liquid that seemed to dribble out of the birds behind. At the monument's base, wreaths of faded red poppies rested, probably from Remembrance Day last November, with handwritten notes that the rain had smudged, which made them unreadable. Around the statue, flower beds were neatly maintained, with tulips, daffodils, and snowdrops bowing their heads as if in respect for the war dead. Bit of personification there at the end. So what I've underlined here are things that I cannot see, really. I cannot see the chewing gum pressed into the names of this war memorial. I can't see the bird on top of the statue. I can't see the flowers and the dandelions around the base of the war memorial either. So that is purely imagined. But that is what the exam board want you to do. They don't just want you to take the picture literally. They want you to only use the picture as a prompt. Okay, it's only a suggestion. They want you to be prompted by it, but not restricted by it. So please feel free to zoom in and to add things into the image. You have to. So here what I did, for example, is I pretended that I was stood next to that war memorial, so I can see the dandelions, I can see the smudged notes on the wreaths of poppies. I can zoom in, and by zooming in, the reader sees more. And if they see more, it means we've got more imagery, and you're going to get more marks. Okay. So if I was to continue this in full, my second paragraph would be about the gardens. My third paragraph would be about the cafe, at the back. And then if I'm going to use a cyclical structure, I would finish by going back to the war memorial, which is where I started, and say something like, despite all of the people wandering through the park, the war memorial continued to stand in quiet contemplation. And by putting that sentence at the end, it would demonstrate that I could use a cyclical structure to organise my ideas. In other words, you've gone 360 and finished where you started. Okay? So that is an example of zooming in. So let's now look at the lighthouse picture. The task would be write a piece of description about a coast as suggested by this picture. Again, this is just a suggestion, it's just a prompt. You are being prompted by the image, not restricted by it, remember. So you might only want to take some bits of this image for you and imagine the rest. So in terms of my journey here, my focal point would be the lighthouse. So that's what I would want to start by talking about. And this time I would want to go in a clockwise fashion. I would want to go to an imagined fishing boat in the water. Maybe a fisherman taking in the lobster pots, for example, or crabbing or something. And then my third paragraph would be about the beach, and I would imagine people on the beach maybe looking for fossils, looking at rock pools. I might want to make it a sandy beach instead of a shingle beach and have children making sandcastles or building things. So remember, you can imagine things as well. And I've got, again, my prepositions in blue: beyond the rocks, the boat, beneath the lighthouse, the beach, above the beach, the lighthouse. So again, I'm using my prepositions to help my paragraphs stick and flow together, but also to structure my writing. So again, if I was to show you an example, I would start by talking about the lighthouse because that's my focal point, and I will return to the lighthouse again at the end if I wanted to use a cyclical structure. So I would say, perched on the edge of a rocky headland, a whitewashed lighthouse stared out to the horizon. Built many centuries ago, it had defended the land like a soldier against the warring power of the sea, warning countless generations of fishermen away from the sharp, jagged rocks. Either side of the tower stood 2 cottages with terracotta roofs glowing orange in the midsummer light, their gardens full of trimmed rose bushes and rocks rescued from the shore. Above this, the tower was pierced with several small rectangular windows, and I wondered whose eyes had peered out of them over the years and seen the exact same view. On top of the tower, a lamp rotated slowly, and a weather vane pointed in the direction of the falling sun, beneath which rusting railings became a perch for many seagulls admiring the view. So you can see in red I've got my prepositions, helping you look around the place. Again, I can't see the rusty railings, I can't see the weather vane, I can't see the rose bushes in the garden. It's imagined because I'm not restricted by the image, I am helped by it, I'm prompted by it. Okay. My second paragraph would be about that imagined boat, beyond the rocks, the fishing boat or a fishing boat. My third paragraph would be the beach, beneath the lighthouse, the waves gently lapped against the shingle shore, and, carrying on with that, shingle being small pebbles, bit of sibilance there. And again, like I said, I would return to the lighthouse because that's my focal point, and it would help me create the cyclical structure because it's going back to where I started. Okay, so the main aim of this video was to use two different images to help you think of these images as like a journey. What is your focal point? How are you going to move around the image in terms of a journey? And where are things in relation to other things? So what prepositions could you use to create that sense of place and how things are located in relation to other things? In so doing that, you're also creating seamlessly coherent paragraphs that all flow nicely. Something else we were looking at, of course, was the ability to zoom in and to be able to zoom in and develop your description by going into specific details. To go back to the phrase I used earlier, good descriptive writing creates imagery because it says a lot about a little rather than a little about a lot. Okay, so you need to make sure that you elaborate and expand and put yourself in the world of these images as if you took the photo. And walk around the setting or whatever it might be in order to create your description. Okay, but please do feel free, remember, to use this image just as a prompt. You are more than welcome to use your imagination as well. So you can include things in the image that you can't see as well. Okay, so that hopefully is useful for the descriptive writing task and how to organise your ideas and zoom in. Thank you.